Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Everton by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Max Meyer, Christian Benteke and Scott Dan after the game. So let's begin. The opening day of the Premier League campaign for Everton and Palace saw their respective campaigns start with a goalless stalemate in South London. Just 90 minutes of Premier League football had occurred at Selhurst Park, the entertaining Bournemouth victory on the last day of the season, since the 0-0 between the Eagles and Everton at the home of Palace back in April. And despite a summer transfer window and a full pre-season, the opening 30 minutes showed exactly why Marco Silva and Roy Hodgson's respective sides had shut each other out just a few games ago, with barely any movements of note. An early let off for Palace did arrive though on 90 seconds when Gylfi Sigurdsson scuffed the volley wide from 10 yards out. However, after that the game became a somewhat tugged affair in the middle of the park, with both teams struggling to bring possession into the final third. A well-worked corner from the Merseysiders on 13 minutes saw Richarlison lose his marker, making a darting run to the centre of the penalty area where Sigurdsson's corner found the Brazilian. The resulting effort from the former Watford man was blocked superbly by Christian Benteke on the line. The first save of the afternoon arrived on 31 minutes when Vicente Guaita continued his fine form from his debut season, thwarting well from an unmarked Seamus Coleman at the back post from 6 yards. A real where were you moment came out in the 35th minute, with the first VAR decision going out over the Selhurst Park screen for a check-in red card decision for a potential sending off for captain Luka Milivojevic. As Selhurst Park held its breath, Jonathan Moss eventually signalled for play to resume with the Everton throw-in. The momentary break in play for VAR seemed to galvanise the Eagles, with Hodgson's side enjoying a lion's share of possession and looking the more likely to score before half-time. Some quick thinking from James McCarthy from a quick free kick in the 40th minute found Max Meyer inside the penalty area. The midfielder dropped his shoulder, cut inside, and his goal-bound effort was deflected just over. From the resulting corner, Martin Kelly threw himself at the ball at the back post, which resulted in the Eagles winning another corner via a deflection from Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Another deep corner followed from Milivojevic. This time Kelly stepped aside for his centre-back counterpart Scott Dan, with Dan's threatening header blocked by Morgan Schneiderlin. The last moment of the game of the half came in the first minute of injury time, with Everton having made an enforced change with Andre Gomes going off for Jean-Philippe Gambin. The personnel change and tactical tweaking almost saw Palace capitalise, with the lively Meyer working space in behind for himself to deliver a cross. However, the effort narrowly missed its intended target of Benteke. The second half looked to be going in the same way as the opening half an hour. However, on 51 minutes, Patrick Van Aanholt came to the Eagles' rescue, to make it 2 goal-line clearances for Palace this afternoon, the Dutchman positioning himself perfectly to smash away Sigurdsson's neat flicked effort. Palace's first and second attempts of the second half came just before the hour mark, with both opportunities courtesy of some excellent work from Benteke. The first effort saw the Belgian win the ball just inside Everton's half from the dawdling Gabim. Running at the Toffees' retreating back line, a smart run, and an even smarter ball from Benteke released Ayew through one-on-one. Selhurst Park rose as our summer signing opened up his body to finesse a shot past Jordan Pickford with his right foot. However, Pickford saved well. Benteke was again the orchestrator just 1 minute later, cutting inside on the edge of Everton's box, with the striker just getting the ball nicked away as he lined up a shot. Fortunately for Palace, the ball landed at an unmarked Meyer, but Pickford again came out on top from 6 yards out. With Hodgson sensing 3 points were on offer for his Eagles, the 72-year-old brought on Wilfried Zaha for Jordan Ayew with 27 minutes left to play. Selhurst Park erupted as the fan favourite entered the 2019-20 Premier League season. There was a chance of 6 potential debuts across the two sides on the afternoon, and the second arrived in the 69th minute, with Moise Kean replacing Calvert-Lewin. The Italian international's arrival was almost delayed though, with Richarlison curling an effort wide, when the onlooking fans had been expecting a net to bulge. The introduction of Zaha saw Palace intensify their dominance of the Toffees, with Van Aanholt nearly giving the South Londoners a deserved lead in the 74th minute, after a clever ball was slipped through by Ivorian. The favour fully swung in Palace's favour just 2 minutes later when Schneiderlin was sent off for a second booking on Milivojevic. With a man advantage, Hodgson threw on the fresh legs of Connor Wickham for Benteke as Palace looked for all 3 points to kick-start their new season. Ultimately, the decisive goal would not come for the red and blue stripes, but there were plenty of positives to take away from a well-earned point at home to begin the 7th consecutive season of top-flight football. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So of course, if you are someone like me who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts, obviously to get all the latest news, then of course do head over to the respective sites and of course follow our account at Crystal Palace. Now of course the transfer window is obviously shut, but of course there's going to be many rumours going into the January transfer window, so if you are someone alongside general Palace news and general opinions, you want to keep up to date with all the latest Palace news, then of course do head over to Twitter and Facebook, because of course we do keep you updated there. And like I said already, obviously we pump that out there along with sort of general club news, also opinions, you know, before the game, after the game, just giving our thoughts or sort of an instant match reaction after the game, as well as sort of discussing things which may happen during the week, injuries, things like that, and of course interviews as well. You know, if any interviews come up which we think you guys might be interested in, of course we'll also link that on our pages as well. Now, like I've said already, if you do want to, well, I've said this many times already, but if you do want to get in contact with us, of course you can obviously comment below in the YouTube section, comment section, but also, you know, feel free to contact us on Twitter and Facebook as well, because of course we're there running these pages, so of course we want to really engage with you lot. Now moving on to YouTube, obviously if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and that is of course with 10 being the best. And to be honest, the main reason I want you to do that is just so I can compare your opinion to mine, and so that we can have, say, a discussion if there are some sort of disagreements in how we thought the players performed. So if you are someone who obviously wants to get involved, feel free to do so. Put your player ratings down below so I can compare it to mine. And of course, if you also have any questions, you know, about how I've rated players or moments in the game you want to get my opinion of, or you want to share your own, of course also feel free to do so in the comment section below. And even if you're not a Palace fan, if you're an Everton fan who happens to be on the podcast, just, you know, comment below with your general views of the game, because in a Palace perspective, we were quite worried before the game, in the fact that Everton, on paper, a much better team, had a fantastic summer in comparison to ours, and we were basically playing with a back four where 3 players, you know, ideally they wouldn't be your first choice centre backs and right backs. So in that aspect, you know, we were quite worried going into the game. So the fact that we came away with a clean sheet, with that sort of makeshift defence, as well as the fact that we actually contained a team as good as Everton, was really great to see. Whereas on Everton's side, they're going to be a little bit disappointed because of all the summer signings they've brought in and the fact that they played quite well in the second half. But I think overall a fair result is the 0-0, considering Everton done well in the first half, we done well in the second. So if you do want to comment below with your views, of course feel free to do so. And once again, that's just so I can sort of read your opinions, compare it to mine. And also, if you do have any questions or anything else you want to say about the game, also feel free to do that as well, because I do like engaging with all the listeners. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting to go with Vicente Guaita, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Guaita's performance, it was exactly sort of what we saw last season, in the fact that it was a performance where he done what he had to do, made some fantastic saves, but then for the majority of the game wasn't really called upon. And the reason I've given him a 7 is exactly for that, in the fact that when called upon, he was able to make big saves, make big punches, but then the rest of the game he didn't really have too much to do. And I think that's mainly down to the wind, in terms of both teams weren't able to, you know, control the ball as well as they liked, but also in the fact that our defence was quite good. And I've already said we were quite worried playing a second string defence, but actually they came out and actually done well in the game. So realistically, because of the wind, because of the conditions, because of both teams not really having that much quality in the final third, and of course the fact that the defence was good in front of him, really meant that Guaita didn't have much to do. But the thing that I like about him, and this is something I talked about a lot last season, the fact that he always looks comfortable, and the fact that if you're sitting there watching him, you can always feel comfortable with him in goal. Whereas sometimes with Hennessy, and I don't really want to berate Hennessy, because he's, you know, when called upon he's alright, but sometimes last season when Hennessy was playing, he just didn't really look comfortable, and that obviously wore onto the fans. And the fact that we've now got someone in Guaita who can really be comfortable and make big saves as well was something which is really great to see. Now, one save in particular I want to talk about was a fantastic reaction save he made to obviously deny Seamus Coleman, and that was obviously from very close range, and I'm sure you've seen it all over Twitter already, but the ball's come into the box. Obviously Seamus Coleman has gone to, only a few yards in front of Guaita, gone to slam it home, and Guaita made himself big, flicked the ball up in the air. And of course, as I think it was Sigurdsson actually jumping for the ball again, Guaita once again made a punch and cleared the danger. So obviously the save was great in terms of the reactions and the reflexes to actually get down low and deflect the Seamus Coleman shot as well. And considering it was that close range as well, made it even harder. And that was obviously great to see in the first half. But the fact that he followed that up literally seconds later by a punch just to make sure 100% that the danger was cleared was something which was really impressive for me. And that really sort of epitomises what Guaita is, in the fact that he's a safe pair of hands. When called upon, he can make fantastic saves, as well as just once again bringing that sort of composure and just that sort of comfortability, I suppose is the word you could use, into that back four. So once again, Guaita here fully deserving of the 7 I've given him, mainly because of that one save in particular from Seamus Coleman, but also just for his general sort of comfortable play throughout the game. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our defence, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6. Now of course Van Aanholt's a player who throughout pre-season and certainly towards the end of last season there was lots of debates as to whether he was playing well. Some people saying he was suspect defensively, not as good going forward as he used to be, and I think this was a game once again where it was sort of a similar theme, and that's why I've given him a 6, because if you're looking at his whole game, his whole performance, he wasn't at his best, but because we know he can do better both defensively and offensively, and that's a little bit disappointing. But I'm sure, as we saw last season, he went sort of spells where he was in good form and then other parts where he was in quite average form. So hopefully put this game behind him and actually come out next weekend even better. Now, one of the main reasons I wasn't necessarily that impressed with his performance is the fact that he let Everton down their right hand side have a little bit too much space, and that was obviously didn't really come to anything because the crosses that came into the box, nothing came off of them. But the fact that he just gave them a little bit too much space allowed people like Bernard to actually get to the byline, or just get to the edge of the box and whip in a really curling cross, was something which was a little bit disappointing, because what you've got to do as a fullback, you've got to stop the balls going into the box, and because he was playing so narrow and he was just giving them so much room, just allowed them to whip the balls in, and like I've said, nothing really came off of them, so that was lucky for us. But it just would have been better to see him defending a little bit better in that situation. And I think two players in particular, Richarlison and Coleman, were two players who benefited hugely by the space that Van Aanholt was leaving, and like I've said, they didn't capitalise it, but just leaving that space isn't really good. And it goes back to what I've been saying last season, in the fact that he just needs to be more aware of his surroundings, just make sure his sort of game management in terms of knowing when to go forward, know when to go back, when to be narrow, when to be wide. If he can just sort of get that part of his game back, then it obviously would be great. And I think one of the factors which I've seen a lot of people talk about on Twitter is actually the absence of Jeffrey Slupp. And I have to agree with that, because whenever Slupp plays, obviously brings us a nice balance to the midfield as well. But actually, he supports Van Aanholt down that left hand side really well. So hopefully, when Slupp does come back from injury, we can maybe see a sort of an upturn in Van Aanholt's performance, because like I said, that support he brings to the side was really good. But there was one real positive about his performance, and that was of course the vital goal line clearance he made in the second half. And once again, Sigurdsson with a chance inside the box, puts the ball goalwards. But if Van Aanholt's not there, it would have gone in, would have been 1-0, game over at that point, because Guaita was, the wrong side of the goal. And, you've got to give Van Aanholt credit there, because he saw the danger there, made sure he got back on the line and was able to clear the danger. And, like I've said, that could have been 1-0, game over, and Everton go away with all 3 points, when actually, that was in the second half, and we actually played better in the second half. So it was actually nice to see him actually get in that good position and clear. But obviously that was a great highlight of his performance, but it was just sort of downplayed by the fact that just his overall play in the game in terms of defensively just leaving too much space was of course something which was a little bit disappointing. But once again, isn't really too much more to talk about his performance, so I do think this 6 overall is a fair result. But like I've said, for me, and I've seen a lot of people say this on Twitter, once Jeffrey Slupp comes back into the side, I think we're seeing an improvement in Van Aanholt's performance, and that just proves how key sort of partnerships on the field can actually be, because that sort of partnership brings great defensive and obviously attacking cover as well. So once again here, Patrick Van Aanholt fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first centre back in our back four, and that is Scott Dann, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, much like what I sort of touched on already, in the fact that this was basically a makeshift back four, and actually quite a lot of fans, including myself, were quite worried before the game, and to the extent that I actually predicted that Gary Cahill would start in the team. Actually, the defence came on top and actually had a really solid shift and rightly deserved the clean sheet that we got. Now, obviously, Scott Dann was quite crucial to that, and he was one player in particular I was worried about, just because his performances in pre-season were very, I don't want to say really, really bad, but they were certainly sort of 4 or 5 out of 10. And, considering last weekend he conceded 4 goals, against Hertha Berlin, it really sort of put a lot of worry into Palace fans' heads. But actually, like I said already, came out on top and actually put in a fairly solid performance. And of course, he started in defence alongside Martin Kelly, and I think that sort of partnership does work, albeit that's not our first choice partnership there. Now, in terms of Dan's performance, and the reason I've given him a 6 is for particularly how well he dealt with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, for most part of the game. The fact that he was limited to very few chances was all down to Dan, actually, in particular, just man-marking him, making sure Calvert-Lewin didn't actually have any space or any chances to actually get on the number of crosses that actually Everton put into the area. So it was really great to see him actually one-on-one actually deal with a particular player relatively well, but also the fact that he lost a little bit of pace, lost a yard of pace, even though he didn't really have pace to begin with. He's obviously slower than he used to be, but the fact that he's still able to deal with the counter-attacks from Everton, the threat that Everton had, was really great to see. And like I said already, I'll go back to the point that last weekend in pre-season we conceded 4 goals at home with Dan starting, so the fact that he sort of turned it around, put in a solid performance, I got a clean sheet, was really impressive for me. And like I said already, very I think most fans, I don't want to say a few fans, but I think the majority of fans were quite worried beforehand. But the fact that he'd done well, done a shift for the team, won headers, made clearances, everything you'll expect sort of from a sort of combative defensive performance, and that's exactly what we got. And it was sort of the Scott Dann of old, not necessarily up to the quality of the Dan of old, but just doing the simple things right and just giving his all for the team, and that's what I saw in his performance there. So like I said already, fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the second centre-back, and that is Martin Kelly, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, much like with Dan, obviously we know that Kelly, obviously being the younger but also being the better player, in the last few seasons or so, we were a little bit less worried with him as we were with Dan. But actually I think Martin Kelly in particular really impressed me throughout the game, as you'll hear later on in the man of the match section. But the main reason for me of giving him a 7 as opposed to a 6 is just the amount of sort of timed interceptions he made in the game, the fact that he made a number of clearances, and the fact that he sort of commanded the heart of the defence really well. And there's no key moments in particular that I can pick out from his performance, just because consistently, and looking back at the highlights, watching certain parts of the game back again, you can just see how Kelly, yes, there was nothing sort of extraordinary, but just doing the simple things right, making interceptions, making clearances, and just being really commanding from the back. And that was really great to see. And once again, going back to that game last weekend, obviously we know he finished last season really, really well, but of course, that 4-0 loss in pre-season could really sort of dampen your morale. But the fact that we came into the Premier League afresh, got a clean sheet as well, really sort of epitomises how their performance was. But like I've said already, lovely interceptions, lovely clearances, and I do think the 7 overall is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our back four, and that is the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, of course, going into transfer deadline day, I might as well talk about it. Obviously, we sold Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and, we probably should have got more money for him, considering the fact that how well he's playing for United now, and the fact that Harry Maguire went for 85 million. So, of course, we've let Aaron Wan-Bissaka go when we thought, we might get a new right back in, maybe a younger one. And, we thought, okay, we've got 50 odd million now, let's go and spend it on the right back. And going into transfer deadline day, there were rumours hanging about that we were going to sign, I think it was 3 players on deadline day we were linked with who were right backs, and in the end none of them materialised, maybe not all of them were true, and we ended up not signing anyone on deadline day, meaning that Joe Ward's the only sort of official right back in the team, which was a little bit disappointing. And once again, going back to that game last weekend, the 4-0 loss, lots of fans were quite worried about Joe Ward in the fact that he got run sort of ragged by the Germans. but actually in the end he put in a really good performance here against Everton, and much like Dan and Kelly sort of put that performance aside from him, and the fact that he's now the only right back in the team, he sort of obviously has to make himself count, and he certainly did do that in this game here with the 7 I've given him. Now, like I said already, he is Palace's only senior right back, which is a little bit worrying in the fact that we've sold someone for 50 odd million and we haven't actually got someone back in that position. But I'm sure if Joe Ward sort of gets rinsed throughout the whole season, which I don't think he will do considering how well he performed against Everton, but if that is the case or he's underperforming, I certainly see it sort of being a window or an opportunity for someone to come in January. But that's far ahead, and you know, he's performed well here, so I don't really want to talk about a replacement for him. But once again, only senior right back in the team, so he's got to make himself count in the team, and he certainly did that. And you know, we know Ward's not the fastest player, but up against the sort of the tricky Bernard, the fact that he dealt with him relatively well, you know, getting close to him when he needed to, that was obviously good to see. And whilst quite a number of crosses did come from that area from people like Bernard, the majority of the time, crosses aside, I think he dealt with the threat down, you know, that right hand side relatively well. And I do think, given the trickery and given the pace of the Everton attackers, obviously former Watford striker Richarlison, you know, the fact that he was just able to deal with them really well, and you know, the fact that he hasn't actually played much towards the end of the last season, because obviously Wan-Bissaka was in that place. The fact that he just came into a Premier League game and performed as well as he did was really great to see as well. So once again here, Joe Ward fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. The fact that he dealt with the trickery of Bernard really well and coped well with other attacking players around him, and whilst he may not have been necessarily an outlet going forward, just that sort of defensive solidity he brings to the side, considering people are worrying about his performance, the fact that he just overcome that and actually performed really well is something that did certainly impress me. So once again here, Joe Ward fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our 3 midfielders, and that is the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, before I go on to talk about his performance, I might as well talk about his new contract, because if you follow me on Twitter at CPC_news_HQ, you would have seen lots of rumours surrounding Luka throughout the summer that he wasn't going to sign a contract, but then there were a few teams interested in him. But in the end, you know, one game before the start of the season, so on Friday, signed a new 4-year deal, which is obviously keeping him at Palace for the foreseeable future, and that was massive news. And you know, not just because of his goals and his captaincy, just the fact that he was in the last year of his contract and he could have left for free in the summer. So whilst he's a very important player to the team, and that's well granted, I think the most important thing is not just keeping him, but actually stopping him going on a free transfer. And you know, like I've said already, new 4-year deal, great news. And it was obviously just before the disappointment of the transfer window really, or deadline day in particular. Just with that fresh news the day after about Milivojevic sort of signing that new contract, sort of lifted the fans, and me in particular. Now, in terms of his performance here, I've given him a 6 because it was much the same in terms of just commanding the midfield really well, putting in sort of a committed display, making challenges when needed, you know, making sure that everyone knows what they need to do, as well as sort of trying to venture forward whenever possible. And you know, realistically, that's all you want from your captain, you know, commanding the team and putting in the shift in midfield, and that's exactly what we got. Now, in terms of his ability to break up play, that was superb, you know, making a number of crucial tackles to obviously win the ball back and just break up play. And ultimately, I think that's why we sort of it finished 0-0, because both teams sort of cancelled each other out, and it was mainly down to people like Luka just making his tackles in the middle of the park, sort of disrupting what Everton were trying to do. We would counter, they would win the ball back, they would counter, and sort of a back and forth game in that respect. And even though Everton had more possession, you know, someone like Luka just breaking up the play just meant that possession was actually redundant, didn't mean anything, because they obviously kept getting the ball being taken away from them. Now, of course, he made loads of challenges himself, but he was on the end of one which saw Schneiderlin go off. Obviously, the first one on Ayew, obviously for his first yellow card, Schneiderlin, you know, that was just a silly little thing. The fact that he went down on his knees, started slamming his hands on the ground, obviously fair enough, get a yellow card for that. And of course, the one on Luka just catching him on the back of his foot, you know, there's no need to do that, no need to leave your leg in there. And ultimately, second yellow card and red card there. Now, obviously, he got sent off there, but there was obviously a bit of VAR in this game here, and I think it was the only real decision which went to VAR, and that was about a possible red card for Luka. Now, obviously, at the time, you're sitting there watching that game, and you're not sure what's happening. You don't know who the red card's from. You don't know what instigated it, who they're looking at. So of course there was a little bit of surprise, when it came up on the screen. But then afterwards, watching Match of the Day, you see it back, and it was just because Luka went into a challenge a little bit too high, but because, and I think Alan Shearer said this, and he normally doesn't say positive things about Palace, but basically they're both going for the ball. Luka's obviously put his leg up a bit, because he's jumping into the challenge, and ultimately there's no harm there, no force there, no real intent there, so rightly so, it wasn't a booking, wasn't a red card. So I do think overall, VAR done a really, people have been talking about it. People all over the summer are saying it's terrible. But actually, the way the Premier League so far, touch wood, they seem to have sort of implemented it well. And certainly that was the case there with that challenge there. Now, ultimately, towards the end of the game, he obviously picked up a booking, but it's inevitable sometimes, when your defensive midfielder makes challenges, you're going to give away free kicks, you're going to get booked for that. But that's sometimes just that little bit of commitment. Obviously overcommitment, but just that little bit of commitment, just to sort of, help your team out, get the ball back, regain possession. Sometimes that's worth getting booked. But I do think overall, if I had to describe his whole performance, I'd say it was steady. The showing in terms of what he was doing throughout the game was very consistent, making challenges, getting the ball far forward, commanding the team. All three of those things I think he done really well, and arguably, much like quite a lot of the players in our team, there may not have been anything spectacular in the game, but the fact that he just went about his shift, and once again going back to that pre-season game, the disappointment of that, coming into a new game with a hard team on paper and actually coming out with a 0-0 draw, even though it might seem boring, it was actually a good result in the fact that there were no expectations or low expectations coming into the game, and of course we rose above that and actually put in a fairly decent performance. So once again here, Luka Milivojevic, the captain, I do think the 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the second midfielder, and that is James McCarthy, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of his performance, and I suppose the 6 really epitomises that, his performance was very similar to those last season, where there wasn't necessarily anything spectacular in his performance, but he had a fairly solid performance, a fairly sort of steady performance, much like Luka, and to be honest, didn't do much wrong, didn't do anything great, and I think really that sort of, like I've said already, really was what he was doing last season, so it was sort of a continuation off of that. But the thing that I was impressed with, and I suppose much like Luka, is just that commitment to actually put a foot in the midfield and actually get involved and make challenges and actually try and regain possession and go forward. So the fact that we still saw that from McCarthy's game without it being spectacular was something that impressed me. The fact that you've got someone who could just tick over the midfield and just carry on consistently doing their job is something that was great to see. Now, there are a number of really great challenges that he was actually involved in, combative challenges, ones where, if you win that one, you've got the ability to counter-attack or to regain possession. So the fact that he was involved in quite a number of these challenges to actually win the ball back for his side, whether that be in our half, whether that be in Everton's half, was something for me personally, was quite impressive. Now, like I said already, I've given him a 6 because there isn't really much more to say about his performance, because it was sort of a fairly average performance, but not average in the sense that he was completely bad, just the fact that there was nothing really outstanding overall in his performance. So once again here, I do think this 6 is a fair result from McCarthy, and I suppose I'll put this question to you guys. Obviously, what do you think? Obviously, we've signed 2 midfielders in the window, obviously in James McCarthy. Obviously, we've got James McCarthy and James McCarthy now, and of course Victor Camarasa as well. So the question I want to ask really is, who do you think takes who do you think who loses their place, I suppose, to put it, in the midfield if either of McCarthy or Camarasa comes into the side? And if it is McCarthy, what sort of formation will we play? Let's say if McCarthy comes in, or let's say if Camarasa comes in. Because for me personally, looking at our midfield 3 we played at the weekend against Everton, I'm looking at that going, actually, McCarthy will be the guy to come out, and maybe Camarasa would go in there and sort of play slightly further forward in a similar role to where Max Meyer plays. Whereas other people may say, actually, if we go back to sort of a 4-4-2, we might have Meyer on one side and maybe, so we might keep McCarthy in there, maybe bring in McCarthy for someone like Meyer, or sorry, someone like Ayew, and actually put Meyer out wide rather than putting someone like Ayew there. So there's loads of different combinations we could play. So obviously I'll leave that for you guys to discuss. But for me personally, if we're going to continue with the 4-4-2 / sort of 4-3-3 formation, with the 3 main midfielders, I personally would say either McCarthy or Camarasa comes in from McCarthy. Not because his performances are that bad, it's just to think that them two players possibly could be more effective in that role. And you know, like I've said already, this performance here wasn't necessarily bad, but if we just had that little bit of a spark, especially in that second half when we were the better team in that second half, maybe we could have got something more from the game. But I suppose, you know, you're looking at the signings we've made, probably give it until the Carabao Cup. So in a few weeks' time when we play that, they're obviously going to probably make their debuts for Palace and get a run out there, and then we'll sort of get to see and judge who will be sort of the midfield 3 or 4 actually going forth in the season. But once again, leave that for you to decide. Does McCarthy keep his place? Does Camarasa come in? Does McCarthy play with McCarthy? Do we sort of change up the midfield? Obviously, I'll leave that for you guys to discuss. Now I'm going to move on to the final player in our 11, and that is of course Max Meyer, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now Meyer was one player in particular, you know, last season I had high hopes for him, but he didn't really play that much, and when he did play he was impressive, but obviously he still didn't get sort of regular starting places in the midfield. And of course going into pre-season we thought, okay, this is it now. If Wilf goes, you know, we need someone to step up, and ultimately Wilf didn't go, but still Max Meyer did step up, and throughout pre-season I don't think anyone can really doubt it. He was by far our best player in terms of just that creativity he brought into the midfield, and that's exactly why I've given him an 8 here. Not just because of his overall performance was good, just the fact that he's continued that good work that he put in pre-season. Now obviously you compare it to last season where yes, he looked good the first few games he played, but because he came in sort of the last week of the window, he didn't have a full pre-season and couldn't quite get embedded into the team until later on in the season. Whereas now he's had a full pre-season, looks to have bulked up heavily over the summer, got so much muscles now, looks a lot more stronger and a lot more physical than he did last season. So he was doing the right things, and the fact that he's combined doing the right things over the summer with the fact that he played a full pre-season seems to have done his performances a world of good. Now obviously going back to the midfield 3, obviously Max Meyer was playing on the left hand side of that midfield, and I think he was quite effective there, because not only was he able to deal with the ball out wide and carry it forward and look to link up with players in the centre, but also it allowed him to actually cut inside as well. And there was one chance in particular just before half time where obviously he got into a really good position, cut inside, went to have a shot, and he obviously deflected over. But that sort of chance really sort of epitomises what we've seen from Max Meyer in pre-season, in the fact that he's able to be in these advanced roles, get hold of the ball, control it well, and whether it be giving the ball to someone else or obviously taking the shot himself, that's one part of his game which has looked, you know, really good and really sharp during pre-season. So that one chance in particular, you know, sitting the defender down, but then obviously his shot was deflected over. That was, hopefully that is a sign of things to come, because I really, if he can continue putting in performances like that where he's running in behind or running in and cutting inside, that's you know, that's really what you want to be seeing from your central midfielder or your sort of wide midfielder, you know, depending on which formation we play. And you know, you've got to also look at that chance and go, he cut in on his right foot, and obviously was quite unlucky for it to be deflected over. But actually later on in the game there was a fantastic chance, you know, Benteke drove forward, got the ball to Andros. Andros has played in Meyer, fantastic opportunity. He probably should have played hit the ball first time and, you know, curled it into the top right. Instead decided to try and shift it onto his right foot, took that extra touch, and of course the defender was able to make a save. So if he, that sort of the first occasion in the first half, fantastic, got it on his right foot first time and was unlucky that it deflected over. Whereas in the second half he once again tried to play it on his right foot, but ultimately that extra touch sort of killed the move and it was easy. I think it was for Keane to actually defend. So just looking at that, you've seen, we've seen how effective he can be in this game, and hopefully there's more of that to come this season, because obviously we knew, from him playing at Schalke, we know, that creative spark he can be in the midfield, and we're now starting to see it, like I've said, with him bulking up over the summer, with him being more physical, with him having a full pre-season. He seems to be not only more effective going forward, but actually that spark as well, that guy who can play that pass, or that guy who can run in behind or cut inside. All these things from his game, especially playing in that sort of advanced midfield role, really impressive to see. And, I can't keep saying it enough, but long may it continue, because first game of the season, he's already put in an 8 out of 10 performance. So hopefully high standards or high performances of that standard will continue throughout the season. But once again here, Max Meyer, impressive offensively in this game here, and of course unlucky not to score on 2 occasions. And I suppose if you listen to the interviews on Palace TV and of course later on in the podcast, he does talk about how he was actually sorry for his teammates that he missed these chances. And you know, the fact that you've got a player actually coming out and going, yes, I missed my chances, I'll put my hands up and say it, that shows some real character about him. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our attacking 3, and I'm going to start with Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, to be honest, this was a sort of subpar performance from Townsend in the fact that towards the end of last season, or I suppose last season as a whole, he had a really great season, contributing a lot more with goals and assists. And of course, coming into this season here, new season here, he scored goals in pre-season, looked quite lively there. But actually, it was quite a disappointing first half. You know, all of that from last season and pre-season riding on it, and then he comes into the game and was quite quiet in the first half. Now, that's not to say that he particularly was bad. It's just the fact that Everton sort of were able to shut out quite a lot of our chances in that first half. And if you look at that possession, obviously they dominated it throughout the whole 90 minutes. But actually, the first half in particular, where Everton were the dominant side, I think he was quite quiet just because of how well they were dealing with him. But much like the whole Palace team, we were a lot better in the second half, and Townsend was one of these players in particular who grew into the game as it went on. And whilst he failed to actually make that telling impact or that contribution, whether that be with crosses into the box or shots, just having that ability to hold on to the ball and get others involved in play, or just that general sort of ability to actually also go back and defend and, you know, be able to counter if you actually get the ball back as well, was something which I was quite impressed with. So whilst it wasn't necessarily the most standout star man, let's say, performance from Townsend, I do think the fact that he grew into the game and done the basic things right, you know, without anything spectacular, was of course great to see as well. But, you know, like I said, he had a fantastic season last season. Pre-season he's been relatively good, so maybe this was a slight off game here, or whether it's the fact that because obviously Wilf's not there, he's missing his spark on the other side of the pitch. Whatever it is, a little bit of an under par performance by his standards, but still some signs here and there of some of his good work. And there was one moment in particular where he picked up the ball in the centre of the park, got challenged by, I think it was Sigurdsson, then maybe Schneiderlin, and obviously we eventually won the free kick. But just the ability to hold on to the ball after them 2 challenges, and eventually we go on to get the free kick. Just that ability, just that hold-up play in the centre of the park was one moment in particular which of course stood out for me. So once again here, Andros Townsend playing on the right-hand side, I do think the 6 I've given him is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to Jordan Ayew, who of course was playing up front but also out wide throughout the game, and I'm going to give him an 8 overall. Now obviously if you would ask me last season, you know, to rate Ayew's performances, obviously on loan from Swansea, you know, the majority of the time he put in sort of 5, 6s and 7s, you know, mainly sort of 6s throughout the season. And, you know, he was good in the fact that he worked hard for the team, but he only scored 2 goals. So in that respect, he wasn't that good. Whereas in this game here, whether it's the fact that he's now on a permanent and he's obviously got to try, you know, he's got on a 3-year deal, so he's now got to actually put himself about a bit. He's probably got a nice contract off the back of it. Or whether it's just the fact that it's a new season, he's working afresh, whatever it was, I've given him the 8 because his performance was absolutely outstanding. Now, obviously, I've touched already about the 2 signings we've made, or the 2 midfield signings we made, and of course we signed Cahill at the back as well. But obviously, Jordan Ayew was one of our other signings, and of course, we're signing on the permanent deal for about £2.5 million. And what a bargain that seems to be if we see performances like this going forward. But out of the 5 signings we made, obviously Jordan Ayew was the only one to start, and you know, the fact that Wilfried Zaha was only named on the bench was ultimately the reason why Ayew got the nod. But nevertheless, a really good performance, playing out wide or, you know, playing down the middle, wherever he was throughout different periods of the game, he really put a shift in there. And, you know, obviously we saw last season how hard he can work for the team. The fact that he puts in a shift, whether that be, you know, trying to hold up the ball, trying to run the channels, as well as actually getting involved in sort of the play in the middle of the park as well. Yes, we saw that last season, but there are a few times where it's like, oh, your quality's a bit lacking. Whereas this game here, like I said already, you know, really reflecting that 8 I've given him, he was absolutely outstanding, looking to get involved. And, you know, you just have to look on Twitter to see people's reactions to just that hard work, that energy, that tenacity he showed in that advanced role was really great to see. And I suppose, yes, it was all good about his performance, and I've given him an 8. But much like last season, all of his good work was with little reward because he didn't get a goal or didn't get an assist in the game. Hence, you know, obviously with it being a 0-0 draw. But just having that intent and just working hard for the team, it is basically the least you would expect. So it was nice to see him actually, you know, have a go and actually put in a really good performance, considering he was in the team in the absence of Wilfried Zaha. Now, there was one chance in particular he had early into the second half. Obviously, he found himself a bit of space, had a shot, and obviously was denied by Jordan Pickford. And much like Max Meyer, he tried to get it on his right foot to try and sort of, you know, other strikers would get it around the keeper, but he used his right foot to try and get it over the keeper. But of course, Pickford made a great save. But the fact that he's actually got that confidence to at least try and sort of chip the keeper or get it over him, as well as the fact that the run in the first place to get into that good position, running in behind, that was of course great to see early on in the second half. But of course, you know, Jordan Pickford, we know he's a class goalkeeper, and it was an easy enough save for him. Now, obviously, towards the end of the game, you could see, because of all that running and all of that sort of energy you put in, he was quite tired and ultimately came off towards the end of the game. And I think he got a really good reception from the fans, because a lot of us, including myself, had moaned about him last season. He wasn't quite good enough, but now he's signing on a permanent, and the fact that he's rewarding us first day of the season with a really good performance, you know, really warrants the actual reception he got. And if it wasn't for him being tired and the fact that, you know, Roy obviously wanted to bring Wilf on, then I could have seen him playing the whole 90 minutes, because he was that effective that maybe bringing on Wilf and, you know, putting him next to Zaha, you know, so here bringing on Wilf and putting Wilf next to Ayew, maybe that could have mustered up something towards the end of the game. But like I've said, I've given him an 8. Can't really fault anything about Ayew's game other than the fact that he didn't score, because everything aside from that part of his game was absolutely fantastic. So long may performances like this continue. But obviously, comment below with your thoughts about Ayew, whether you think he starts in our starting 11, or whether you think maybe he'd be an impact player off the bench, or if we do some sort of rotation, you know, where maybe one game Benteke will start with Townsend and Zaha on the wings, or maybe one week Ayew and Benteke start with Zaha playing wide and Townsend wide as well. Whatever you think might be our possible formations going forward this season, of course, feel free to comment them below as well. Now, I'm going to move on now to the final player in our starting 11, and that is, of course, Christian Benteke, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, much like what I said with Meyer in terms of having a good pre-season, that was much the same for Benteke. You know, got a few goals here and there, and actually he was fairly effective in pre-season. Now, whether that's because of his new knee, like I talked about at the end of last season, or whether it's just the fact that he's a clean slate, he's in the last year of his contract, and, you know, he really just wants to, you know, get back to his old self. Whatever it was, a good performance here, hence why I've given him a 7. Now, one of the things I quite liked about his performance was not necessarily his contribution in terms of actually goals or assists, because obviously we didn't get any, but just that positional play, you know, being in the right place at the right time, especially, you know, in terms of when we're going forward, was of course great to see. Now, obviously, being in the right place at the right time is great going forward, but also he also was doing it really good defensively as well, in the fact that Richarlison had an effort quite early on in the game, and Benteke was able to header it just in front of the line. So not only in an offensive sense was he in a good position, not all the time, but, you know, there was one moment in particular in Match of the Day they talked about where, you know, rather than being on that right hand side, he probably should have drifted inwards in between the centre backs, but he didn't. But then there were other times in the game where he was able to pick up the ball from deep because of that good positioning. But for me, the best positioning in the game was his defensive positioning, in the fact that when he was in the area, he was able to clear Richarlison's effort, which, much like Van Aanholt's early on in the game, if he hadn't have been there, it would have been a guaranteed goal. So it was nice to see him actually clear that off the line, or clear it just in front of the line as well. Now, much like Ayew, obviously playing up top together, they worked hard up top, you know, running the channels, taking the ball from deep. And, you know, like I talked about that Ayew chance, a lot of that chance came from Benteke picking up the ball on the halfway line, driving forward, offloading the ball to Townsend to actually put through Ayew. So not only was Benteke looking to have chances himself, as well as, you know, giving that defensive contribution, but also he was looking to carry the ball forward, work hard up top, and, you know, not necessarily to create stuff for himself, but just actually create openings for other players around him. So once again, like I've said with Ayew, like I've said with Max Meyer, you know, hopefully Benteke can have a really good season, because what we've seen so far in pre-season, and obviously this game here, obviously hopefully should put us in good stead, because it was a good performance. And, you know, hopefully, much like Ayew, they can put the past behind them. This is a new clean slate, and they can carry on and sort of get back to them old selves in terms of their performances. But once again here, I do think Christian Benteke, last player in our starting 11, does deserve the 7 I've given him.
So I'm now going to move briefly on to the two substitutions obviously Palace made in the game. Wilfried Zaha came on for IU in the 64th minute, and of course Connor Wickham came on for Benteke near the end of the game, 83rd minute or so. And both of these players, they weren't really on the pitch that long enough, considering the fact that it was a 0-0 draw, so they didn't really have that much impact. And for that reason, I'm going to give Zaha a 5, and of course Connor Wickham so late in the game, not going to give him a rating overall. But in terms of Zaha's performance, there were lots of debate beforehand as to whether fans would boo him, and the fact that he's obviously handed in a transfer request, tried to push for that move to Everton on the last day of the window, but nothing happened. But nevertheless, I personally would never have booed him either way. But of course, there were a few people on Twitter saying, "Oh, we're going to boo him." But in the end, he came onto the pitch with a superb reception, and actually came out after the game and said thanks to the CPC family, I think he said, for the support he gave me today. So actually, he's also acknowledging that sort of welcome and reception he got from the fans as well. So I think it was a little bit silly that people were planning to boo him because he handed in a transfer request. But at the end of the day, he's a professional, got to carry on what he's doing, and we've also got to support him because he's our player. Probably, well, in my lifetime, the best Palace player I've seen. So you've got to support him with all your will. Now, once again, I suppose going back to that reception he gave obviously proves once again that we're still supportive of him. Yes, he may want to move on, and we do understand that, but the support is still there, and that's something that I suppose we'll cherish going forward. Now, once again, despite that really good introduction, obviously he couldn't really get much impact in the game, and that's just because he came on 64th minute. Yes, we were quite good in that second half and we were quite dominant, but other than a few times he actually got to the byline, crossed the ball in, one in particular where he crossed the ball in for Wickham, and a few other times where he was able to get inside the box and create chances. Aside from that, didn't really have any real impact off the bench, and that's not to say that he was necessarily terrible. It's just the fact that, looking at what Roy Hodgson said, he's obviously been at AFCON over the summer. He's only had a few days training, and of course you're going to expect him to be a little bit rusty, and certainly that was the case here. Now, in terms of Connor Wickham, obviously he was only given 7 minutes or so off the bench, made little impact because of there was so little time left, and because Everton were already down to 10 men, they were sitting very deep, which of course made it harder for the likes of Zaha and Wickham to actually get chances. But I suppose that chance in particular where Zaha got to the byline, crossed the ball in, Wickham was in the right place, obviously try and at least put it goalwards, but the goalkeeper and a defender were there, so nothing really could have come of that. So the one real chance that Wickham had in the game, nothing really he could have done to score from that. Now, just to go on, I don't want to talk too much because I think I've summarised the game really well here, sort of adding bits here and there, talking about the players, but just an overall sort of small summary of the game. I personally, and I don't think I was alone, was quite worried before the game in terms of the lineup, and it wasn't necessarily the fact that we didn't have Wilf in the side. It's just the fact that second string defence we had with Kelly and Dan in particular, and Ward as well, you could add into that. We conceded 4 goals in the last pre-season game, and of course coming into this game we were quite worried. And if you said to me beforehand, we're taking 0-0 draw, not the most boring one, but still a 0-0 draw and a clean sheet. If you said that to me at 3 o'clock, come 5, I would have been absolutely delighted. And the fact that we got that, and it wasn't necessarily a really boring 0-0 draw, was so great to see. And I suppose, I can't really complain when you think our best players were on the bench. You've got people like McCarthy who would normally play in the midfield. You've got people like Camarasa and McCarthy who could come into the side and, add to our depth in midfield. And obviously, you've got you've got our best player on the bench in Zaha. So with players out injured, you've also got to look at Sacco and Tompkins and Jeff Slop. You've also got to look at the players on the bench as well. So given all of that sort of fuss about the lineup and the fact that we conceded 4 goals last weekend, and the fact that sort of didn't put much faith in the defence, the fact that we sort of over sort of come that and just got the clean sheet, got the point as well, was something which I was really impressed with. And the main reason I think we did manage to get that was obviously the fact that Everton, even though they're a hard team on paper, in the end, they weren't necessarily as clinical in the box as they would have liked to be. But I just think it was down to Palace being well drilled, defensively, especially with that second string defence, working hard. People like people like Benteke actually trying to carry the ball forward and try and regain possession. People like Luca making tackles and challenges. So the fact that we were well drilled, as well as just working hard, giving a rule for the team, is the reason we got our point. And I suppose the wind was also quite helpful for us. That's been a joke going around recently, but actually there are a number of chances where the ball's come into the box being quite windy, or the ball's being crossed and the wind is taking it in a different direction. So whilst I don't really like to use the wind as an excuse, you could actually say and put it the other way and go, actually the wind played quite a big role in this game, in the fact that things like goal kicks, things like throw-ins, things like that weren't necessarily going the right way. But overall, I was really impressed with the 0-0 draw we had. Wasn't at all boring, and certainly something to build on this season. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. And obviously, as you heard in the player ratings, in the fact that it was a very good overall team performance, there are a number of players who I could have put forward for the award, and naturally it was quite difficult to narrow it down to only 4 players, just because across the field, there are a few good performances here and there. But the 4 players I've gone with are Vicente Guaita, Martin Kelly, Max Meyer and Jordan Ayew. So I've gone for a mixture of players between, across the field, and that's just sort of a fair reflection, I think, of the game as a whole. So in terms of Vicente Guaita, obviously he didn't really have too much to do about the game, but the fact that he always looked comfortable, gave us confidence, knowing that he was in goal, and the fact that he made that superb reaction save from Seamus Coleman, getting down low, putting the ball up in the air and then punching away the follow-up as well. The fact that he made that fantastic save to keep the game at 0-0, as well as just his overall play being good throughout the game, is why I've put him forward for the award. And once again, I can't really talk about it enough, but that sort of confidence he instills in the defence, but also in the fans, knowing he's very comfortable in the goal, is really important. In terms of Martin Kelly, I just think overall defensively, considering the worries before the game, he just went in there, put in a very good shift, making loads of timely interceptions, doing everything to perfection, as well as making a number of clearances as well. And he combined that all whilst also being that commanding force in the central defence. Obviously, moving on to Max Meyer, there's so much I could talk about this guy, but the fact that he was lively on that left-hand side, had lots of energy. When he was drifting down the middle as well, he was able to carry the ball forward. And even when he was playing out wide, once again, using that energy, using that pace and that attacking threat he's got to actually cut inside, especially cutting inside on his right foot, he was very effective doing that as well. Had a few chances himself, one deflected over, one got deflected out for a corner. So, two chances there in particular, which they both got deflected out for corners, but 2 chances there which were really impressive, and certainly why I've put him forward for the award. And just for the simple fact that he was that creative spark going forward, whether that was down the middle or out wide. And of course Jordan Ayew as well, the fact that he just put in a shift, he worked hard for the team, 2 important things for me. And even though there was little reward for it, just having that intent and that energy is why I've put him forward for the award. The fact that he also had a few opportunities in that second half. Yes, he was denied by Jordan Pickford, but just having that intent and just working hard and giving his all for the team is something that I really liked from his performance. And the phrase I'm going to use is just kept running, because that's exactly what he done. And that's the reason he got substituted in the end, because he was giving off so much energy, he was just sort of exhausted towards the end of the game. Now, like I've said already, there were numerous players who I could have put in here, and ultimately, if I could talk about each player individually and say why I should put them up for the Man of the Match award, I probably would do that. But I think narrowing it down to these 4 players, one from obviously a goalkeeper, a defender, a midfielder and a forward, I think that gives a fair reflection, a good overall of the game as a whole. And when you consider we were quite worried before the game, actually coming out with a clean sheet and a 0-0 draw was actually quite good in the end. Now for me, there's only one real clear winner here. Obviously it was quite close between the two of them, but just for that energy, that tenacity, and the fact that he just kept running and running is why I'm going to give it to Jordan Ayew. So congratulations, Jordan. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was a solid performance from him. And, you know, for me, it was between him and Max Meyer. Obviously, Max Meyer for that attacking threat, and obviously Ayew as well with the few chances he had. But just that sheer energy and that sheer sort of tenacity that Ayew showed. Not saying that Max Meyer didn't show it, but just the fact that Ayew just added that onto his game was something that really did impress me. But of course, feel free to comment below with your man of the match, who you thought should have been on the shortlist. And of course, if I did miss anyone out, of course, feel free to also drop that below. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Max Meyer, Christian Benteke and Scott Dan following the game.
Max, are you pleased with the point?
Not with the point, because I think we deserve more. Because of the second half, we played very good. But with the performance, I'm very happy, because we played very good in the second half, and I think we deserve to win this game.
You had a chance in the second half. Did you think you'd score?
I think I need to score in this position, but it was a bit windy in this moment, but it's not the excuse. I think I have to score, and sorry for the team.
It was a very tight game, wasn't it? Bearing in mind, you had a couple of chances. Patrick Van Arnold has made a fantastic clearance off the line. Guaita's made a good save. There wasn't much in the game.
I think both teams had the chances, and I think both deserve to score. I think Everton had a good chance in the first half, but I think in the second half we had more chances, and I think because of the second half we deserved more the win.
Would you have hoped in the period when the man has been sent off that you would capitalise and hopefully score a goal in those last 10 or 15 minutes?
Yeah, we tried to score, but we didn't go so quick, because we scared to get the counter attack, because Everton stayed a bit deeper then, and yeah, it was not that easy for us to create chances, but we did our best, and we hope we can win the next game.
So what's the general feeling after that one?
We felt, especially in second half, like we lost 2 points, because we were sharper and stronger in second half.
So I guess with the red card, it came maybe too late in the game to take advantage of having the extra man.
I think it's not just about the red card. It's more about our performance in the second half. We looked more stronger. We were front foot, and we were higher. We just wanted to get this goal, really.
So a great ball through for you for Jordan's chance. Do you enjoy playing up front with him today?
Yeah, exactly. Since last season, we didn't have the chance to play a lot together. But I know what kind of player is Jordan, and he knows as well which kind of player I am. And it was hard work, but I think it's just a shame that he couldn't score. But the main thing, we got chances. So hopefully next week is gonna be in.
And after pre-season games, how great was it to be back in the Premier League?
Yeah, it felt great. Finally, the real work start for us, and it was a great start this afternoon, and now we have to keep going like that.
Scott, 0-0 draw today. Are you pleased with that?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. They're a good side, Everton. And after last week's performance, albeit still only pre-season, it wasn't a great showing. So to play like that today, put in a type of performance what Crystal Palace is about, and yeah, we maybe had a few chances in the end where we maybe could have took the 3 points, but to start the season, with that type of performance, yeah, it's a big plus.
And for you personally, you look great out there today. Are you feeling back to how you were pre-injury now?
Yeah, definitely. I think last season, I come back probably as quick as I probably could from the injury, and it probably worked out well for me in terms of not having to come back into the team straight away. The lads were doing great. Played a couple of cup games, worked my way in, and then obviously, unfortunately, a couple of the lads went down with injuries, and I managed to play the last 8-9 games, which was nice to get back. But I wouldn't say I was fully fit back then, even though I felt really good. Gone away the off season gives that a little bit more time to recover and come back and try to have a good pre-season. Yeah, looking forward to the season now, and hopefully we can keep on putting in performances like that.
Yeah, Sheffield United next week. How different a test is that going to be?
Yeah, it's never easy to play anyone in this league, but you know, sometimes the teams coming up, you don't necessarily know, you know, how they're gonna fare. You know, a lot of teams who come up the early part of the season, they hit the ground running. You know, it will be tough going there. I've played there previously in the Championship when I was at Coventry. You know, it's a tough place to go. So, yeah, we won't underestimate them. I'm sure it's going to be a really tough game, and hopefully we can go there, get the right results, put in a similar type of performance, and hopefully, you know, get a few goals as well.
I think if you look at the sort of the goal chances, yes, I think that as the game wore on, we got better, and I think if any team in the second half was going to win the game, it should have been us. I thought we established quite a lot of control, even more so after the sending off, obviously. But I thought we were getting and growing into the game more and more, getting stronger. But if you do just take the goal chances for each side, I think we had 4 or 5 golden opportunities, and they probably had a similar number. And it was two well-matched teams, I thought, you know, two organised teams that aren't easy to break down. So I guess that, you know, a 0-0 is always going to be on the cards unless someone can find a way of conjuring up a bit of magic to break the deadlock.
Pleased with the performance for first game of the season?
Yes, I am, because we've had such a strange pre-season. We've had, you know, as many as 6 or 7 players that were playing on a regular basis for us last year, not even training, you know, not even in the building. And then we've had injuries to the young players that we thought might get a chance to show what they can do. So it's been very, very hard on that starting 11 today. They've, you know, carried the brunt all the way through. Now we've actually brought some players in, you know, we've got Gary, we've got James McCarthy, we've got Victor Camarasa, we've got Guaita back fit, we've got Wilf back fit. You know, that's an enormous number of players, 5 players to add, and now we're still waiting on Jeff Schlupp and Mamadou and James Tompkins. But when we get them back, I think we're going to be a much stronger unit, a much stronger group, and I thought it was good for what the players did today to come across an Everton team, you know, with that quality that they have and that strength, and to get a very deserving 0-0 and to get close to winning it.
With all the speculation that's been surrounding Wilf this summer, how pleased were you with his performance when he came on?
Yeah, he did well, I thought. I mean, he set us up for an incredible goal chance, which could have won us the game there when he slipped Max Meyer through with the goalkeeper, who made a good save. I think he's a little bit rusty, there's no doubt about that. You know, when a player comes back after 3 weeks away or on holiday, basically, after the African Nations Cup, he's going to need a little bit of time to really find his true form, because he's a phenomenon when it comes to fitness. He was fit enough to play the game and fit enough to run around, but to find the form that I know he would want to find, he's going to need a week or 2. But it was good to give him the chance to come on and play those 20 minutes, and he almost helped us to the 3 points, excuse me.
Conditions were difficult out there for the players as well, weren't they?
They were, yeah. I mean, there was some very good. I mean, the 2 goalkeepers were outstanding, I thought, both in their saves that they made and in their kicking, because it couldn't have been easy for them. But I thought the players dealt with those conditions pretty well, and the referee was pretty sensible as well in that respect. So for me, it was like most Premiership games, they're all entertaining to me, because I lived them to such a level that I'm not neutral enough to say what's really good and what's really bad. But I'm more than satisfied with our performance, and I would like to think that the crowd today got really good value for their money.
They've had a red card, and there was one VAR check for a possible red card on Milivojevic as well. Do you stand there and worry slightly that it might come into effect immediately?
Well, frankly, no, because I didn't know what they were checking. So I mean, I had no idea what had been seen. It was pretty obvious with the Schneiderlin one that, you know, what had happened. You know, he just mistimed the challenge really and caught Luca in a nasty way and injured him, and the referee decided that was a yellow card offence. But I didn't see Lucas at all, to be honest. I'll have to look at the video and see if I can find nothing. But if they can't find it in Stockley Park, I'm sure I won't be able to find it.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Max Meyer, Christian Benteke and Scott Dan had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Everton. But make sure to come out next week for our post-match review of the game against Sheffield United. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.